Hello friends, welcome to my channel The Insight Table. Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. What you're about to hear is intense, emotional, and deeply confrontational. This story explores conflict, public outrage, and a cultural clash that shook daytime television. This content is for what happens when you kick a hornet's nest, what happens when you poke a sleeping bear, believing that the steel bars of a television studio are enough to protect you from the consequences. What happens when the polished, air-conditioned arrogance of the Manhattan elite comes face to face with the raw, unpolished grit of the American heartland? We are told that celebrity feuds are performative. We are told they are carefully managed PR stunts designed to boost ratings and sell albums. But sometimes the script gets thrown into the trash. Sometimes it's not about publicity, it's about honor. What you are about to witness in this narrative is not an interview. It is a reckoning. It is the moment Jason Aldean, the country superstar known for his defiant anthems and unshakable loyalty, walked onto the set of The View Times, not as a guest, but as an avenging angel. He came with a singular purpose: to settle a score. 1 week prior, the host had humiliated his friend Blake Shelton. They had mocked his accent, ridiculed his intelligence, and treated him like a prop. They thought the story ended there. They thought they had won. They were wrong. This is the story of the day the music stopped and the fighting began. This is the moment Joy Behar learned that there are some lines you do not cross, and there are some men who do not back down. The atmosphere inside the ABC studios was different this morning. It wasn't just tense, it was hostile. The usual buzz of excitement was replaced by a low, nervous hum. Security was tighter than usual. The producers moved with frantic, jerky motions, whispering into their headsets with wide eyes. They knew who was coming. They knew the history. And they knew that inviting Jason Aldean onto the show just days after the disastrous Blake Shelton interview was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. But the ratings demanded it. The controversy demanded it. When Jason Aldean arrived, he didn't use the VIP entrance. He walked in through the side door, flanked by 2 members of his own security team, large, silent men who looked like they could bench press the entire studio. Aldean wore his signature cowboy hat, the brim pulled low, shading his eyes. His boots hit the polished concrete floor with a heavy rhythmic thud, times that echoed down the hallway. He didn't smile at the interns. He didn't stop for the makeup artists. He looked like a man walking into a saloon to confront a card sheet. He carried an energy that was palpable, a coiled, dangerous stillness that made the production assistant step out of his way without being asked. Inside the studio, the stage was set. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the center looking wary. She was a veteran. She sensed the shift in the barometric pressure. But Joy Behar sitting to her left seemed emboldened. She was shuffling her papers with aggressive confidence, a smirk playing on her lips. She had defeated Blake Shelton, or so she thought. She was ready for round 2. She was ready to take down another country bumpkin. 30 seconds. The floor director shouted, his voice cracking slightly. Aldean stood in the wings. He adjusted his jacket. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of artificiality that permeated the room. He wasn't here to promote a tour. He wasn't here to talk about his new single. He was here for Blake. And we are live. The applause sign flashed. The audience cheered, but it was a confused sound, a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Welcome back," Whoopi said, her voice lacking its usual boom. "Our next guest is one of the biggest names in country music. He's a multi-platinum artist who never shies away from controversy. Please welcome Jason Aldean." Aldean walked out. He didn't wave. He didn't do the celebrity point and smile. He walked straight to the table, his stride long and purposeful. He sat down in the chair that Blake Shelton had occupied just a week before. He kept his sunglasses on for a beat, staring at Joy Behar before slowly taking them off and placing them on the table. His eyes were cold, ice cold. "Welcome to the show, Jason," Joy said, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickly, sweet condescension. "It's brave of you to come here, considering, well, everything." "I'm not here for bravery, Joy," Aldean said. His voice was a low growl, a stark contrast to the high-pitched chatter of the studio. It was a voice that sounded like gravel and whiskey. "I'm here for clarity." "Clarity?" Joy raised an eyebrow, glancing at the audience. Well, we love clarity. We were just talking backstage about your friend Blake. It was quite a scene last week. It wasn't a scene. Aldean corrected her, cutting her off instantly. It was an ambush. The audience went quiet. The pleasantries were over before they had even begun. This wasn't going to be a soft opening. Ambush is a strong word, Sonny. Host interjected, trying to play the mediator. We simply asked Blake some hard questions about his platform. You mocked him, Aldean said, turning his gaze to Sonny, then snapping it back to Joy. You didn't ask questions. You insulted a man who has done more for his community in 1 year than you have done in your entire career. You treated him like a punchline because he talks slow and wears denim. You thought it was funny. Aldean leaned forward, his forearms resting on the glass table. The muscles in his jaw were tight. I'm here to tell you it wasn't funny. And I'm here to find out if you have the guts to try that with me. The setup was complete. The trap had been laid, but not by the hosts. Aldean had brought the trap with him. Joy Behar laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous sound. She wasn't used to guests pushing back this hard this early. Usually, she could bully them into submission with her sharp tongue and fast New York pace. But Aldean wasn't playing by those rules. He was solid, immovable. Oh, Jason, don't be so sensitive, Joy said, waving her hand dismissively. It's television. We ask tough questions. That's our job. Maybe if you country stars weren't so fragile, you could handle a little debate. Fragile. Aldean repeated the word. He let it hang in the air. Yes, fragile. Joy doubled down, her eyes flashing. She leaned in, sensing a fight. You write these songs about being tough, about trying that in a small town, about guns and grit. But the moment someone challenges your worldview, you cry foul. It seems a bit hypocritical, doesn't it? There it was, the trigger. She had attacked his music. She had attacked his character. She had attacked the very ethos of the culture he represented. The temperature in the studio didn't just drop, it froze. Aldean didn't explode. Not yet, he smiled. But it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just realized he has a winning hand in poker. You want to talk about hypocrisy, Joy? Aldean asked. His voice was dangerously calm. Let's talk about it. You sit in this studio in the middle of Manhattan, surrounded by armed security guards, and you lecture people in rural America about violence. You lecture us about fragility while you live in a bubble so thick that reality can't penetrate it. I do not live in a bubble, Joy snapped. I read the news. I know what's going on. You read the teleprompter, Aldean shot back. There's a difference. Excuse me. Joy's face flushed red. You read what they tell you to read. Aldean continued, his voice rising slightly, gaining momentum. You sit here, and you judge people you've never met. You judge Blake. You called him simple. You implied he was stupid because he doesn't speak the way you speak. But let me ask you something, Joy. When your car breaks down, who fixes it? When your pipes burst, who comes to save your flooded house? When you need food on your table, who grows it? That is a simplistic argument, Joy yelled. We appreciate the working class, but that doesn't excuse the hateful rhetoric in your music. Hateful. Aldean scoffed. Loving your neighbor is hateful. Protecting your family is hateful. Standing up for your flag is hateful. It is dog whistle politics. Joy slammed her hand on the table. And you know it. You write songs that incite violence against people who are different from you. I write songs about survival. Aldean roared. The sudden volume made Whoopi jump. Aldean was no longer leaning back. He was sitting on the edge of his seat, his presence dominating the room. I write songs about people who are tired of being lectured by people like you. Aldean said, pointing a finger directly at Joy. People who work 50 hours a week, pay their taxes, go to church, and raise their kids to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir. And then they turn on the TV and see you calling them racists, calling them uneducated, calling them the problem. They are the problem if they support intolerance. Joy shrieked. And you are the leader of the pack. I am not a leader, Aldean said, his voice turning to steel. I am a mirror. And you hate me because when you look at me, you see the part of America you can't control. You see the part of America that doesn't need your permission to exist. The audience was in shock. Usually the Times View Times audience is a fortress of support for the hosts. But something was shifting. The sheer rawness of Aldean's defense, the palpable loyalty to his people was striking a chord. A few people clapped. Then a few more. Joy heard the applause and her eyes widened. She looked around, betraying her panic. She was losing the room. This is ridiculous. Joy stammered, looking at Whoopi. He's just spouting slogans. He's not answering the question. I'm answering the question you're too afraid to ask, Aldean said. And what question is that? Whoopi asked, finally entering the fray, her voice low and cautious. Aldean turned to Whoopi. He respected her more than Joy, but today no one was safe. The question is, why do you hate us? Aldean said, why do you hate the people who built this country? Is it because we remind you that all this? He gestured around the expensive studio. Is fake? Is it because deep down you know that if the lights went out tomorrow, you wouldn't last a day in the world we live in? We would survive just fine. Joy laughed, but it was a high hysterical sound. We have brains, Jason. Something you clearly undervalue. The insult hung in the air. She had done it again. She had called him stupid. She had gone back to the well that poisoned the Blake Shelton interview. Aldean stared at her. He didn't blink. The veins in his neck stood out against his collar. Brains. Aldean repeated softly. Yes, intellect. Critical thinking. Joy sneered. Aldean slowly pushed his chair back. You think you're smart, Joy? Aldean said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. You think because you can quote the New York Times, you know how the world works. He stood up. He didn't just stand. He unfolded. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a physical imposition in a room of talking heads. He hooked his thumbs into his belt loops. He looked like a storm cloud that had finally decided to break. You're about to find out, Aldean said, looking down at her, that there is a big difference between being smart and being wise. And you're about to learn that lesson the hard way. Jason Aldean stood there, a monolith in denim and leather, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Joy Behar whole. The studio lights reflected off his belt buckle, but his eyes were dark, unreadable pools of judgment. You think you're smart, Aldean repeated, his voice booming without the aid of a microphone. You think because you sit in this city, in this tower, that you hold the keys to wisdom. But let me tell you something about smart, Joy. Smart is knowing how to change a tire in a snowstorm so your family doesn't freeze. Smart is knowing how to plant a crop so your community doesn't starve. Smart is knowing that when a friend is attacked, you don't write a think piece about it. You stand up and you fight. Joy Behar scoffed, though the sound was thin, lacking its usual venom. She leaned back, trying to create distance between herself and the towering figure of the country star. We are not talking about changing tires, Jason. Joy snapped, her voice shrill. We are talking about culture. We are talking about progress. You represent a backward way of thinking that holds this country back. Backward? Aldean laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. You call loyalty backward. You call respect backward. You looked at Blake Shelton last week, a man who would give the shirt off his back to a stranger, and you treated him like a spectacle. You laughed at him. You mocked his accent like it was a defect. He couldn't articulate his points. Joy yelled, losing her composure entirely. He was stumbling. We were just trying to help him. He wasn't stumbling. Aldean roared, slamming his hand onto the table. The glass rattled. The water mug shook. Sunny still actually flinched, pulling her hands into her lap. He was being polite. That's the difference between us and you, Joy. When we disagree, we listen. When you disagree, you destroy. Blake sat there and took your insults because he was raised to respect women, even when they don't deserve it. But I wasn't raised to be polite to bullies. I am not a bully, Joy screamed, standing up now, trying to match his height, but failing miserably. She looked small. She looked frantic. I am a journalist. I am asking the hard questions. You're not a journalist, Aldean said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that cut through the noise like a knife. You're a mean girl with a microphone, and you've been getting away with it for 20 years because nobody has had the backbone to tell you the truth to your face. The audience gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The producers were frozen. This wasn't just off script. This was off the rails. You think you can sit there and judge us? Aldean continued, leaning in so close that Joy could see the reflection of her own fear in his eyes. You think because we like trucks and beer and flags that we're simple? Let me tell you what simple is. Simple is thinking that everyone who disagrees with you is evil. Simple as living in a world where you are always right and everyone else is a deplorable. That is simple, Joy. It's lazy and it's cowardly security. Joy shouted, looking toward the wings. Get him out of here. He's threatening me. I'm not threatening you, Aldean said, spreading his arms wide. I'm exposing you. He turned to the audience. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the people, the tourists from Ohio, the fans from Tennessee, the regular folks who had lined up for hours to get into the studio. How many of you are tired of this? Aldean asked them. For a second, there was silence. Then a lone voice from the back, a man in a baseball cap, shouted, "Yeah." Then another, "Tell her, Jason." Then another. Joy looked around, her eyes widening in horror. The studio audience, her safe space, her fortress was turning. The wall was crumbling. "You see that?" Aldean said, pointing to the crowd. "That's not hate, Joy. That's exhaustion. People are tired. They are tired of being told they are wrong for loving their country. They are tired of being told they are stupid for having faith. And they are damn sure tired of watching people like Blake Shelton, good men, get torn apart by vultures like you, just for a ratings boost. We are not vultures, Whoopi," Goldberg interjected, trying to regain control of the ship that was rapidly sinking. "Jason, you need to calm down. We can have a civilized discussion." Aldean turned to Whoopi. He didn't yell at her. He just shook his head. The time for civilized discussion was last week. "Whoopi," Aldean said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "When you let her," he pointed at Joy without looking at her, "attack a friend of mine. You chose your side. You chose the circus over the truth." He reached down and picked up his sunglasses. The movement was slow, deliberate, final. "You wanted a viral moment, didn't you?" Aldean asked, looking back at Joy one last time. "You wanted to bring the angry country guy on to spike your numbers. You wanted to make me look like a fool." Joy was trembling. She was pale, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She had been stripped of her weapons. Her sarcasm, her interruptions, her moral superiority. None of it worked against a man who simply didn't care what she thought of him. "Well, you got your moment," Aldean said. He put his sunglasses on. The dark lenses hit his eyes, turning him back into the enigma, the superstar, the outsider. "But you lost the war." Aldean turned to the camera with the red tally light. He pointed a finger directly at the lens. "Blake," he said, his voice steady. "I got your six, brother, always." Then he turned and walked away. He didn't wait for a commercial break. He didn't shake hands. He walked off the set with the same heavy rhythmic stride he had walked in with. Asterisk, thud, 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 asterisk. Joy collapsed back into her chair, clutching her chest. He can't talk to me like that. Who does he think he is?" But nobody was listening to her. The audience was on its feet. They weren't clapping for the show. They were clapping for the exit. They were clapping for the man who had walked into the lion's den and slapped the lion on the nose. The studio doors swung shut behind Jason Aldean, but the energy he left behind was radioactive. The episode didn't just end, it imploded. The producers cut to a commercial for life insurance, but the feed had already been clipped, saved, and uploaded. Within 20 minutes, Jason Aldean was the #1 trending topic in the world. Within an hour, Fire Joy Behar was #2. The internet didn't just react, it chose sides. For years, the divide between Hollywood and the heartland had been growing, a silent fissure widening in the bedrock of American culture. Jason Aldean hadn't just crossed that divide. He had built a bridge over it and set it on fire. Clips of the confrontation flooded TikTok and YouTube. The moment Aline said, "Asterisk, you're a mean girl with a microphone." Asterisk became an instant classic, remixed into songs, printed on bumper stickers, and tattooed on forearms. Blake Shelton posted a single image on his Instagram that evening, a picture of him and Aldean fishing with the caption, "Asterisk, action talks, bullshit walks. Thanks, brother." Asterisk, it received 4 million likes in 3 hours. ISK the view times went into crisis mode. Ratings for the next day's episode plummeted as a massive boycott organized by country music fans took hold. Advertisers sensing the shifting winds began to pull their spots. Joy Behar issued a non-apology on Twitter claiming she felt physically threatened, which only fueled the fire of ridicule. But the real victory wasn't in the ratings or the tweets. It was in the feeling that swept across a certain part of America, the small towns, the rural counties, the places the cameras usually forgot. For one brief, shining moment, they saw themselves not as the punchline, but as the hero. Jason Aldean had gone to New York not to make peace, but to make a point. And as he flew back to Nashville that night, watching the city lights fade beneath the wing of his plane, he knew he had done something more than just defend a friend. He had reminded the world that you can only push a quiet man so far before he pushes back.